Hello and welcome to a chapter on wireless networking. Okay, so let's begin. We're going to describe the different types of wireless communications, not including we'll talk a little bit about the Bluetooth, but we're mainly going to be concentrating on the 802.11 because this is the wireless LAN and it's the one that requires you to have an access point to connect wireless devices to a wireless LAN. So we'll talk about in details how to set it up, how to secure it, how to configure it, where to place your actual access point to make sure that you get the best connection, and everything that you need to know about how to set up, from zero to all the way to the end. All right, so wireless networks. A wireless network means, well, wireless or RF signal, the radio signal, is when you have an electromagnetic wave emitted from a transmitter. So the transmitter or the antenna is where the actual wireless signal. So when you run current, remember we talked about that, that electromagnetic wave travels around the antenna and is radiated in omnidirectionals. It goes just like I told you from the last chapter, and it just vibrates outside in the air. It has the amplitude and the frequency. Uh, if the wireless signal is, the antenna could be sending 2.4 billion cycles per second. That's 2.4 gigahertz. If it's 5 gigahertz, it's 5 billion cycles per second. Okay, so but the media where data actually travels, it's in the air. It's an RF signal, so there's no wiring is required. If anybody ever asks you what are the advantages of having a wireless device or a wireless network, of course, the only really advantage is mobility, being able to move around without having to be restricted to a desk. You don't have to be wired. Um, the disadvantages are there are two really disadvantages, and they're kind of we're taken care of. Speed, which is speed now, is not a problem. You can get with the 802.11 AC, theoretically, you can get close to 7 gigabits per second. In general, if you are the only one connected to that access point, you can get close to a little over a gigabit, which is not bad. That's faster than an Ethernet gigabit, a gigabit Ethernet. So when it comes to speed, nowadays is not really a big problem. The issue is security because your data is traveling in the air, even though WPA2 encryption is extremely powerful and it's almost impossible to crack. It's still an issue with denial of service attacks. So if you have a denial of service attack, somebody can deny you access to your access point. So, so we'll be talking about that in details as we move along. And now let's talk about the wireless spectrums. The wireless spectrum goes from 9 kilohertz all the way down to 300 gigahertz. If you go below the 9 kilohertz, your ear is a detector, can sense the frequencies all the way up to 4 kilohertz. Typical human voice operates between 300 hertz to 4,000 cycles per second, 4 kilohertz. This is the typical voice. It can go up to 6 kilohertz. The higher the frequency, the higher the pitched voice is. Um, Anything all the way up to the gigahertz is man-made. That's where the radio signals are. But anything beyond the visible light starts between 4.7 times 10 to the 14th hertz all the way to 7. 4.7 is the red frequency. So if your eye detects a 4.7 times 10 to the 14th hertz, it sees red. If it detects 7 times 10 to the 14th, that's about, what is that, violet. And all the different frequencies in between. So your eye is also an electromagnetic detector, right? The Federal Commission is the one that oversees all the wireless, and even if they are wired in the cable, in the coax cable, they all see. It's regulated by the FCC. So when you want to bound a wireless signal, you typically use a coax cable. That's why the coax cable is used to connect from, let's say, your dish. If you have a dish receiver from DirecTV or Dish Network, you connect it with a cable TV with a coax cable to your receiver. It bounds the wireless signal. That's what the coax is for. All right, moving on. Here's the typical spectrum. It goes from 9 kilohertz all the way in here. So all of this is man-made till you get to when you get to all of this is man-made. This is called the RFs. It used to be called microwaves, but now it's used as RF, radio frequencies. All right, so radiation pattern. Think of this if you have an antenna, if you have your pencil standing up perpendicular to a desk, the radiation comes, it's like a lopes, it's like an apple from the top to all the way to the bottom of the antenna, and it radiates outward. The strength of the signal, the strongest of the signal is right in the middle of your pencil of that antenna. The weakest is on the tip. So in other words, never ever point the antenna to you. Make sure that the antenna of your wireless router is perpendicular to your wireless device. So always the antennas have to be perpendicular, never tilted in any way. If you put it on the ceiling, make sure it's pointed perpendicular to the ceiling. If it's on a desk, make sure it's perpendicular to the desk. Okay, that's the way to get. And if you want the best reception, you have to be in the line of sight. If you can actually see the antenna, that means there is no obstacles between. You should be able to get the strongest signal. Strongest signals means that you're going to be able to send the data directly, and there's going to be very minimal amount of frames being lost, and therefore you won't have to repeat sending out frames, and therefore you're going to have a much better reception. That's when you get a lot of bars. All right, unidirectional antenna means it's not an omni, they send it in one way. You can actually do that. You can download a software on your wireless router, and you'll be able to direct the signal in one way inside the building, so nothing leaks outside. Omnidirectional, that's the default. It goes in all directions. The line of sight, like I said earlier, is the best way to do it. When there's obstacles, if there's walls, the frequency typically, if it's 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz, it can easily go through walls, so that's not a problem. But some of the signal will be reflected, so you'll get some weakness. If the wall is extremely thick, so you probably won't not get, most of the signal will be reflected or observed by the wall itself. So you do not want to put your access point behind a thick wall, or maybe down in the basement where there's a lot of piping, because if there's any metal, you're gonna get a lot of reflections. Reflection is the bouncing back of the signal. Diffraction is when the signal goes in but it's bent, and scattering is when the signal goes all over the place. Scattering, all of these we can take advantage of: reflection, diffraction, and scattering. Please write down these three definitions so you'll know the difference, and you'll be able to see them in a minute. There is a graphical representation, the difference between reflection, diffractions, and scattering. All right, multipath signals, that's when you have, the reflection, diffraction, and scattering. The advantages is because the signal is all over the place, is a better chance of getting reception. The disadvantage is there may be a delay, because sometimes an antenna may be receiving the same signal from different places. So the antenna, there has to be a device that actually filters out and only picks up the strongest signal. It's called the rake antenna, RAKE, by the way, that will filter out the strongest signal and just ignore all the others. All right, so diffraction is when the signal goes in and it's bent. Reflection is when the signal bounces back. So the signal goes in and it reflects back. Scattering is when it hits something and it stops bouncing all over the place. Okay. Fading is the variation in a signal strength as a result of some sort of an electromagnetic energy, scattered, reflection, or diffractions. It's the weakness of the signal. It gets weak because it got deflected so many times, it got weak. That's what fading is. Um, when the signal gets thrown out it gets bounces off too much. Attenuation, as we've discussed earlier, is the signal the amplitude of the signal specifically gets smaller and smaller, right? As not necessarily caused by um, hitting obstacles, but because it's traveling so long, it just attenuates. All right, you need an amplifier to re-amplifies the signal. Typically with wireless, you will detect to see if the signal has lost half of its strength, then you need an amplifier. That's called, if it drops by 3 decibels, 3 dBs from the original signal. Noise is electromagnetic interference. This is the biggest issue with wireless, is making sure that your access point is away from any electromagnetics interference, any really type of radio frequency, microwaves, you name it. Try to keep your signal away from any electromagnetic waves, no matter how weak or strong they are. If they are away, then your router will still be strong. Because here's one point I want you to remember. Uh, if there are two devices that are sending the same frequency, let's say 2.4 gigahertz, the detector, your PC will listen to the one with the strongest amplitude, with the strong, and ignore the other one, even though they're both sending, the same signal. So in other words, if you have an access point, a wireless router that's operating at 2.4 gigahertz, and you're connecting to the internet and you're all happy and everything's wonderful, and then somebody brings in another device that operates at the same frequency, 2.4 gigahertz, but has a stronger signal, more power, you're going to lose connection because your device is immediately going to listen to to the one with the higher power, right? That's a denial of service attack. So you can if your neighbor next door to you has a 2.4 gigahertz router against the wall, just all you need to do, if you want to cut them off, just put another device behind your wall that operates at a higher frequency. I'm sorry, at a higher power at the same frequency, and you'll knock them out. Then your neighbor will have to move his wireless router somewhere else, right? So that's a denial of service attacks. This is really the biggest issue with wireless connection. All right, noise is always, the electromagnetic interference, like I said. The FCC, the Federal Communication Commission, the one that oversees all the frequencies and license them, they took a band of frequency called the ISM, the industrial, scientific, and medical band. So they said, okay, we're going to reserve several frequencies that are going to be unregulated and unlicensed. As long as you are using them within or a company, a building, you should be able to use them without any problem. As long as the power is limited, then you don't have any, you could do whatever you want. And this is where the wireless LAN lies. It's within the ISM band. The 2.4 gigahertz, the 5 gigahertz, all are under the new ISM band, right? So 5 gigahertz is faster than 2.4, twice as fast. That means the speed and the data rate is much, much faster. And the bands, they are 5.1, 5.3, 5.4, and 5.8 gigahertz. Now, what they do in each one of those, they give you 24 unlicensed band of frequencies that you can do. So weather, military, radar, communications, hospitals, industry, medicals, you name it. All any of the industrial, anybody that wants to use it. It's just like private addresses. Remember we talked about that. The IANA reserved the private IP addresses to use within the LAN. Here, there's a private, well, not necessarily private, but an unregulated frequency that you can use without having to pay for those frequencies. All right, so here's a typical 2.4 gigahertz, and there are each one of them has a certain band, a 20 gigahertz band. So this is one, 1, 2, 3, 4. Usually they have an 11 bands that you can use. In here, if you I think within the end you have 14 bands. Each band can send out a whole bunch of frequency give out to users. So if your router is operating in band 1, that means it's going to give out frequencies between 2.412, and then you slice them up with 20 megahertz till you get to this edge right here, and that's how many frequencies will be given out within one band. Band 2, by the way, also gives out frequencies that are same in band 1, so they overlap each other. So if you have two access points, you do not want them to be one in band 1 and one in band 2, and definitely not one in band 1 and the other one is in band 1. You want to make sure that you use, if you have two adjacent access point and you want them to be in the same network, make sure you choose one in band 1, the other one in band 6, and the third one, if you have a third one, in band 11. So here's a question that always comes up on the on Network Plus exam. What are the three 2.4 gigahertz bands that do not overlap? Band 1, 6, and 11. They do not overlap, so the frequencies that are given to users will not be will never be the same. So there will not be any duplicate frequencies, and there will not be any interruptions. All right, 1, 6, and 11 are the three bands that do not have any overlapping within the 2.4 gigahertz. So if you have three different access points, make sure you put one on 1, 6, and 11 because the others overlap each other. All right, so here's a whole bunch of different frequencies. Let's continue. Let's start with the categories. There are three different categories for the personal area network. There's the Bluetooth, the 802.11. I'm sorry, 802.15. Bluetooth is really designed for very small devices that use a small amount of power, and they can communicate in an ad hoc communication directly to each other without the need of an access point. Typically, that's what Bluetooth is used for. So you see them in headphones, you see them in remote control. Your laptops may have one, right? So those are the Bluetooth devices. Infrared is really when you have to be in the line of sight with infrared, and you typically see them with goggles and remote controls, right? Near field communication (NFC), you have to be extremely close, and you have a lot more transmission of much better data rates. But you can download files. You can turn your car on without having to put your key in. If you're close enough, your key fob will be close enough to the car, and you'll be able to turn your car on without having to use the key, right? So that's the NFC. All right. So again, Bluetooth operate. What do you need to? Please write the following down with Bluetooth. It operates at 2 gigahertz and 2.48 gigahertz. It uses hop between frequency within that band. It's called frequency hopping. They jump about 800 times a second. So it's secured. Requires close proximity of about 10 meters. And also, please write down bluejacking and blue snarfing. Those are definitions that typically come up on the 80 on the Network Plus certification exam. All right, so please write these down for Bluetooth. NFC also, I want you to know that because nowadays there are more and more in use, and so they do. The tag can collect power from a smartphone or other devices by a magnetic induction. Okay, you have to be within a close distance, and you get much more. Excuse me. Much higher data rates. All right, here's a typical NFC tag, just like your key fob. You're close enough, you can actually open doors with it. You can even just put it in your pocket and just as soon as you come close, you can open the door without having to pull it out, right? With my card, I can do that. All right, ad hoc means the nodes transmit directly to each other. So please um, write that down. I want you to know what ad hoc means. Infrastructure means that you need an access point, so also write that down as we discuss it later on. All right, so here's an infrastructure wireless LAN. You have the access point, and these are the clients. Everybody goes to the access point, and the access point is connected wireless. So the access point, this is the 802.11. When you have it's designed to take an 802.3, which is the Ethernet frames. I'm sorry, from here, the wired Ethernet frames, convert them into wireless 802.11 and vice versa. So it's really designed to connect wireless devices to a wired LAN, right? So a mesh wireless LAN may include several access points. That's an extended um, ESSI, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. All right, so again, you'll allow the good thing about the wireless LAN is if you've done it, you can actually roam around the building and be able to be connected from one wireless LAN to another. With that's called portable, and be able to connect without having to re-authenticate. Right? Typical access point can give you up to 300 feet, which is not bad. If you're going to go beyond 300 feet, if your building is, much bigger than that, then you need another access point. Make sure, again, one is set on channel 1 and the other one is on channel 6 so that there'll be an easy, seamless connection and no one will have any duplicate frequencies being assigned, right? If you have multiple access points in the same network, it's best to get a wireless controller that controls what frequency is being given out, who's connected to what, and all of that. So all the wireless access points will be connected to a wireless controller, and it's managed from there. All right, so the IEEE 802.11 is the one that houses all the Wi-Fi standards, starting with B, A, G, N, A, C. There's another one called the D, and the new one that's coming in 2019 is going to be the AX, which is 4 times the speed of AC. So things are coming, and on 5G, cellular connection is also coming out. More and more devices are going to be on the 5G network. They will both exist, by the way, the 802.11ax, the new one, and 5G. So things are going to be speed. 5G is supposedly going to be 20 times faster than what we have right now, the 4G LTE. All right. So let's do, and 802.n is still being deployed. AC is now really the dominant. So what do you need to know about? Let me see, which one do you need to know about? N operates typically at 5 gigahertz. Okay, so let's start with and forget about the B, A, and G because that's really legacy networks now. No one is using them. The 802.11n operates at 2.4 and 5G, so write that down. It's backward compatible to B and G because you can see you can make it operate at 2.4 gigahertz. Theoretically, you can get up to 600 megabits per second. Usually you get between 65 and 500 megs. And the range is up to 400 meters, which is not bad. Uh, MIMO is introduced with the 802.11n. MIMO stands for multiple inputs, multiple output, which means you have multiple antennas sending and receiving data to a host, right? Now, with the 802.11 AC, it only operates at 5 gigahertz. That's what I want you to know. You can go between 1.3 and close to 7 gigabits per second. Okay, so that's really wonderful. And it all depends. You can get half a gig of connection, depending if you are the only, if you are the only one that's transmitting, you can get close to 7. But typically you can get close to 6 gigabits per second. And they use something called MU, multiple user MIMO. So, multiple antennas, 2 or 3 antennas could be talking to one device, and at the same time, a couple of other antennas will be, communicating with another device at the same time. All right. They all have an 48-bit number, the MAC address, like we discussed before, right? Just like an Ethernet NIC. Every device that needs to communicate with the wireless access point, it's preferable to be, if it's AC, a wireless router, then all your devices should be AC, so you can get the maximum speed and all the features that the 802.11 AC provides. All right. The access method, the way they send data, they use the carrier sense multiple access with collision avoidance. So please write that down. All right. So they try to minimize collision, and they use acknowledgement packets to verify the transmission. And also write down that they do require more overhead than the 802.3, than Ethernet. That's what the 802.3 is. The real throughput is less than the theoretical maximum, always. So you're not going to get your 7 gigahertz. It's always going to be less than that. That's why you typically get about less than gigabit of connection. They also, I want you to write this down, they use the request to send, clear to send protocol. So you have to send in a control signal to the router to let them know that you want to send. And then the wireless router will send you another control signal when it's ready. And it says, okay, you're clear to send. This is like when you are at the airport and the pilot communicates with the tower, sends in, request to send, can we fly? And then he has to wait for, the pilot has to wait for the tower to send them a signal, you are clear to fly. And then that's when you start sending data, right? All right, so that's that. Association meaning being connected to the network. All right, so every wireless device, if you have a laptop, when you turn it on, it will immediately scan the airwaves for the 5 gigahertz or even the 2.4 gigahertz for wireless network that are beaconing, right? That's the word we should use. Beaconing meaning, the wireless router beacons 3 things: the name of the network, the SSID, please write that down. It sends out, it broadcasts, in other words, the name of the network, the SSID, what type of security is enabled. Is it WPA? Is it WEP? Is it WPA2? And the speed. Those are the 3 things that the wireless router broadcasts. And you're always scanning the airways for that. The service set identifier is the name of the network, the SSID. So write that down. All right. That also you are in control of telling the router if you want that to be broadcasted. So when you turn your laptop on and you see the name of the network, that's the SSID number. identifier, I should say. Basic service set means that you have one access point. Okay, so write that down. So one access point, meaning there it is. This is, and all of these guys are associated, connected to this network. This is a BSS. An extended service set is when you have more than one access point in the network. So write that down as well. This is to allow you to roam, to go from one, to go from one access point to another within a large area. All right, so here is an extended where you have two access points, right? That's an ESS. Reassociation, of course, if you move from one point to another and you have to be reconnected. Okay, the frames. Okay, if you remember when we talked about the 802.3 frame, the Ethernet frame, the actual frame of an 802.11 is a little bit, there's a lot more stuff on there. As you can see, there's more addresses. You have the sender and the receiver MAC address, the router wireless access point address, and the destination address as well. The data is a little bit more variant. It can go up to 2312. It still have a 6-byte FCS. This is to check the integrity of the frame, right? All right. This is in comparison. I don't remember any questions on the actual frame itself. It was on the exam. Okay, so here's something that I want you to know. With the 802.11c, they use the multi-user input-output. So that's one thing. That's why you achieve much higher power. Multiple user MIMO means that multiple antennas can be sending and receiving data to the users at the same time. So two antennas could be to one user, another two antennas will be sending and receiving data to another user, and maybe two or three antennas to another user. So you have much better connection that way. Okay. Channel bonding. If you have, each channel maybe 20 megahertz frequency. So within one band, if there's nobody else connecting, I can use all the channels that's not being used in that band of frequencies. And if that's called channel bonding. So please write that down. Two adjacent 20 megahertz frequency bonded together. So you can get 40 megahertz or maybe even larger than that. So the wider the channel, the more data that you can send out. So that again, this is also allowing you to increase the throughput. Okay, the third thing that AC also allows us to have is frame aggregation. Instead of sending multiple frames, you can combine a whole bunch of frames with one big huge frame and send the data together. And there is two techniques to do that. You can use the aggregated MAC service data unit or the aggregated MAC protocol data unit. So they can reduce the overload. And look at this. You can actually have, using the AMPDU with the AC, you can get, 4.6 million bytes being transmitted, right? That's much, much more efficient than just sending one frame with 2,300 bytes, right? I mean, this is really theoretical. But if you use the aggregations, why not use it? And you get much better throughput. So using MU-MIMO, channel bonding, and frame aggregation, you can achieve those gigabits throughputs with the AC. Okay, so that's that. Another thing that I want you to know, the 802.11d, which is out in the market, write that down, operates at 60 gigahertz. It's only used within one room, but it's mainly used for virtual reality, but you get extremely high speed. We're talking about 10, 20 gigabits per second. If you can use virtual reality and you don't have to be restricted to wires. It's typically used for one room. The other one is I want you to know that's coming up is the 802.11ax. This is a new one that's coming. It's going to be 4 times the speed. You're going to be able to have antennas outside and the outside, you could be outside in your backyard, pretty far away from your wireless router and get pretty good speed. Um, there's also, and you're going to achieve very high rates. And it's you're going to be able to go within the city limits. The idea between the 802.11ax is supposedly it's going to compete with the 5G, but probably we'll see about that. Also, the 5G cellular connection, which is coming out soon, it's going to come out in the desktop. So that is going to blow out those cable companies, Verizon, Fios, Dish Network. So starting in 2019, they're going to get those competition. T-Mobile, AT&T, and Verizon is going to start rolling out the 5G pretty soon. It's going to be 20 times faster than the 802 than the 4G LTE. So that's coming soon, and we'll see how that's going to roll out. 5G is going to be around for a while. Nobody's even working and thinking about the 6G. So that's, you know, they're estimating the 5G will be around for the next maybe, I don't know, 5 to 6 years. In 5 to 6 years, only half of the population will be connected through 5G. But imagine you have it on at home and your desktop. You can have your TV, your video, your data, your voice, your cellular phone, all within one service provider. And as long as there's a lot of competition, so hopefully the prices will drop. I'm assuming in the beginning when they first roll the 5G ad, um, it's going to be a little bit expensive. I'm assuming. We'll see what happens. All right, designing and where do you place the access point? Well, here's what I'll tell you. It is best, you don't have to, you can, there are, you can write, design and figure out, measure the rooms and figure out an exactly a point where you want to place your access point. But it's best to put it in the middle of the the house, if it's in the house or a building on a floor. It should be in the ceiling. The antennas is perpendicular to the floor, where there is no obstacles whatsoever, not in the ceiling and not in the front of it. Okay. Um, Sometimes that's not feasible. If you need to put it on the side wall, and you do not mind that the frequency is pointing outward, just make sure your antennas, again, is facing perpendicular to the ceiling. All right. Um, what else do you need to know? You can download software on your access point to make the antennas work in unidirectional. Make sure they radiate only inwards. So you could do that if you want to. Stay away from obstacle. Don't go in the basement where there's a lot of pipings, and so the signal is going to it's going to struggle to go through. Although there are ways of connecting and extending the wireless signals, I don't recommend that. Um, don't put it where a place where there's a lot of wiring and you know I had my wireless router next in the back of my laptop and my TV, and you can connect fine the TV because I'm wired through it, and the desktop was fine, but people away, in a couple of rooms down the road, they had a hard time doing it, so connecting. So I moved it so where you can actually have where there's less optical. Try to put it on top of a cabinet or something where there is, it's much easier, and so the frequency can freely um, be radiated outward. All right, so that's with the design really. That's where you really want to put it. All right, so that's that with the design. I mean, you can read through this if you want. Um, then the things that you need to set up. Here's what you need to do. As we'll do an exercise in our classroom on how to configure and secure a wireless router, but it's very easy. So what you need to do, take your modem, connect it to the internet. So when you purchase a router, um, from your modem to your wireless router internet connection, internet port, you run a straight through cable, right? Take another straight through cable, connect it to one of the other four Ethernet ports, and connect that cable to your laptop. Okay? Uh, if you go to command prompt, you're writing these steps down, although we're going to do it as an example. So go to the command prompt and type ipconfig. All right, you're going to see and look at the default gateway. What is that address? You take the default gateway, write it down. Let's assume it's 192.168.0.1. So you open up your browser on your laptop, you type that number on the top, 192.168 in the URL, 192.168.0.1, you hit enter, and then you'll have access to your wireless router, but they'll prompt you with a password. If it's a Linksys router, the username is admin and the password is admin. So you should go in there and change that. If it's a different types of router, it should be given to you what the default settings are. If you have no idea and you bought it from somebody and it has a password that you don't know what it is, there should be a pin button in there. You press it, wait for 10 seconds, and it will reset the router to its defaults. But you can set and then you can reset it from scratch. But you should know what the username and password, and you should always change it so no one has access to it. All right, that's the administrative password to access your wireless router. Now you can unhook the wired and you can go wirelessly from now on because your laptop will be. But what you should do while you're in there, you should set up the security. So let's discuss that since we are here. Your wireless router by default is set up as a DHCP. So if you're connected, it's immediately going to lease you an IP address. Anyway, so when you are in there, you typed in your username and password, go and set up the SSID, the name of the network. Somewhere you'll find it. Whatever the default is, just write down whatever the name that you want the router to broadcast as the name of the network. That's the SSID. If there's are any other frequencies, just disable them if you don't need them. If you do not, here's a security. If you do not want the router to broadcast the SSID so nobody sees that you exist, you can disable it. But if you do that, make sure you go to your laptop or your computers, and in the NIC area, there's a place where you can actually type in the name of the SSID so you'll be able to connect, right? Others won't be able to see that your network actually is there because the router is not broadcasting it, but you'll be able to connect. But remember, that's not really 100% secure because if somebody probe in the airwaves and when you connect, they'll be able to see the SSID because you have to write it, right? You have to stamp on it when you're transmitting so you can be authenticated. So they'll be able to see it. But at least, the reason you're doing that is you don't want anybody that's walking around what we call war driving, trying to see if there's any open networks and try to break into your network, which will create traffic. Not necessarily that they'll be able to. All right. So the second thing you should do is what we can do is what MAC address filtering. So you can go into the router, type in all the MAC addresses that are allowed to have access to your wireless network. So when you connect, they're going to check your MAC address, and if you are, then you're good to go. So figure out what all the MAC addresses of all the devices that you want, by typing ipconfig space /ALL. You should be able to find out what your MAC address is and just go into the wireless router and type that in there, and your router will only allow this device to connect or any other device that has a MAC address in its list. It may be an issue if there's any other devices. You have to go in there and always enable that because the router will not allow anyone else if they're not on the list. But remember, again, if somebody's probing the airwaves, they'll be able to see your MAC address when you are sending it. because that's not encrypted. The third and the most important settings is the wireless encryption method. And I'm telling you right now, use WPA2. So write that down, WPA2. Enterprise if you are in a company, home, WPA2 home if you are at home. You have different settings and features when you are if for an enterprise and different than if you are at home. When it comes to a password, make sure you write a phrase or a sentence. Okay, and you should be able to go. So you can. Here's are the three things. You can disable the SSID broadcasting, do MAC address filtering, and the encryptions. So that's how you pretty much secure your network, right? All right. So once you are authenticated, you'll be good to go. WPA2 is the stronger. WPA is the one, WEP, there's an old WEP that they first started out with. They use the same address, the same key to encrypt and decrypt and authenticate you. It's crackable. So if that's the only one that's available because you have a very old router, use it. Otherwise, don't bother. Always use WAPA, but I'm telling you right now, there's plenty of exploit kits on the dark internet that you can almost get. I think you can even get them free that enables you to break into a WPA secured network. That means you can get in and use it. They won't be able to see the data that's being encrypted because WPA and WPA2 to the actual data that's being transmitted will be encrypted with temporal keys. So keys are randomly generated when you first authenticate, and there's about 55 of them. And once you finish, a new set of keys will be regenerated next time you connect. So nobody is going to be able to crack those keys and see the actual data that you when you are in, but they'll be able to use your network because there's like one or three or four keys that they use to allow you to authenticate. And there are exploit kits out there that they can figure out what these keys and be able to break into your network. So use WPA2. WPA2 is very, very difficult to use, even to break into. I haven't heard anyone or any exploit kits out there um, that are able to break into a WPA2 network, and the keys are impossible. The ones that encrypt the data. It takes over 17 trillion years, and that's with a T, trillion years to crack. So it's virtually impossible. It's extremely secure. They use e, uh, the enhanced encryption standard, ESD, yeah, enhanced encryption standard. That's right, ESD. I think. Oh God, I forgot what it stands for. Anyway, war driving. War driving is somebody walking around with a laptop scanning the airwaves for an open network. Please write that down. That's what the word driving, and I ask you to write that down because it comes up on the Network Plus certification exam. Or chalking is in the old days. They used to chalk, believe it or not, they used to draw that this is like telling you that this is a hotspot, an open network. No, no one does that anymore. The evil twin. This is important. This is very, very important. If you go in with your laptop to a coffee shop such as Starbucks, uh, and you connect automatically, that might be a problem. Make sure because somebody can go in and set up their laptop as to make it look like exactly as if it was Starbucks. You know, it'll be broadcasting the same SSID. There's everything is the same. And when your computer connect, it will be connecting to the attacker's access point laptop. That's the evil twin because he makes himself look like the Starbucks access point. And you'll be going through his connections, and of course, he'll be able to capture everything that you're transmitting. So you definitely do not want that. All right. WPA attacks involve the interception of network keys. It is crackable, right? WPS attack is cracking a pin in order to access the APS settings. This is by brute force. Brute force attack means you just keep guessing to find out what the pin is. Nobody really does that. That's not feasible anymore. Okay, troubleshooting a wireless LAN. Um, you can use cable continuity and performance testers to let you know uh, about the wireless connection stations, APs, but you can use the Wi-Fi analyzer to evaluate the availability of networks, the weakness of the signal. You can use a spectrum analyzer. This is really a little bit more expensive. That can tell you the frequencies that are being transmitting out there. I don't think that's feasible, but the wireless analyzers, there are plenty of them around, especially if you're designing a big wireless network and everything is going to be wireless. You want to make sure that the signals are covered all over, right? Some of the new buildings they only go wireless, so you probably need a wireless analyzer. Please write that down. The wireless analyzer can evaluate the Wi-Fi network availability, optimize the Wi-Fi signal sharing, because most likely if you're going to set up a wireless network, you need to use that to find out where the strength of the signal all over the building, make sure everyone has enough strength to be able to connect. All right. Some tools that you may be using um, with the testing tools, you can indicate the effective the attenuation of the signal. Like I told you, I had one guy asked me, he owned a laundromat. He wanted a wireless connection in his laundromat, but he wanted only the people that are inside the laundromat to connect. He doesn't want anybody sitting outside to have any connection. So, believe it or not, I asked one of the students to investigate, and that student was able to download software and updated their wireless router to make it into a unidirectional so only people inside were able to connect. Um, Again, some pitfalls to avoid. Please write these down. SSID mismatched. So if you ask the router to disable the broadcasting of the SSID, make sure you spell it right when you type it on the client end. The incorrect encryptions. If you did WPA2 on the router, on the wireless router, make sure you're setting WPA2 on your laptop and so forth. Um, Overlapping of channels. Remember, channel 1, 6, and 11 are the ones there's no overlapping, right, or frequencies. Mismatched standards. If you have an 802.11a or B, let's say, operates at 2.4 gigahertz, and you're trying to connect to an AC network, that's not going to work, right? The incorrect antenna placement, if it's not perpendicular to the floor, may be an issue. If you have interference, if you put your wireless router next to a microwave, every time you turn the microwave on, some of the 2.4 gigahertz, because microwaves operate at 2.4 gigahertz, may leak out, and you may have some sort of interference. Depending on where you place it. Cordless phones operate at 2.4 gigahertz, and some video monitoring systems. Home monitoring systems may also use 2.4 gigahertz, and they use stronger signals, so you may have an issue. Um, so any of that, if you have firmware updates that need it, especially for security or speed, you should enable that. In general, as a rule of thumb, I'm reluctant to really download and upload firmwares unless it's really needed, because sometimes it creates a lot of problems. If there's an update and you really don't need it, there's no security patches or the new features I really don't care for, I don't bother. If it's working, I don't, and everything is there and what I need, especially if not a security patch. If it's a security patch, I update it regardless. I upgrade the firmware. All right, so that's that. So we'll get to practice some of this in the lab. We'll be able to set up a wireless router. So we'll do it. Um, through software and the actual routers in the lab. So until we meet in the next chapter, keep up with the work, and don't forget to write down what I told you and submit that as your homework. All right, I'll see you on the next chapter, guys.